The public has only a rather vague idea of what economists actually do and what they research. Some people believe that economists are constantly busy with stock exchange prices, or that they are always thinking about the policy the European Central Bank or the Federal Reserve should adopt. Economists do, in fact, do those things. However, if we want a fundamental description of what is at the heart of the economic way of thinking, central banks and the stock exchange have no role to play. The basic problem that economists have to grapple with is quite simple, that the resources that are available fall well short of meeting people's needs. We have a fundamental and permanent scarcity problem, and economists deal with solutions to that problem. To tackle it, we need economic systems. This is where the stock exchange and central bank have significant roles to play. That is why we eventually end up at these highly developed and complex institutions, even though we are still essentially dealing with scarcity. A scarcity problem can be very simply pictured as an allocation problem. Suppose there is a cake of a certain size and a number of hungry people would like some cake. If every individual states how much cake he or she would like to have, and if all the claims to the cake are totaled up, it will be clear that the cake isn't big enough to meet all the demands. And therein lies the problem. How is the cake to be shared? How are we to decide who gets how much? Of course, this problem has been simplified enormously. In actual fact, the size of the cake is naturally not fixed. If the skillful use of resources results in the baking of a bigger cake, the scarcity problem is relieved. We will, however, remain with the extreme simplification. Imagine that besides the cake, there is also some healthy whole grain bread with a vegetarian spread. One possible solution would be that each person receives the same amounts of cake and whole grain bread. That probably would please few of them. Those who like only cake would be just as dissatisfied as those who prefer whole grain bread. Another solution might be to put prices on the cake and the bread and make the act of eating a piece of cake conditional. Only a person who is prepared to pay a certain price is allowed to eat cake. If we assume that all those involved have the same income, this eliminates any issues of fairness, which are not of concern at this point. Putting price tags on the cake and the bread would require each individual to decide how much the cake is worth to him relative to the bread, and only the individuals whose valuation is at least as high as the price being asked will get to eat some cake. If we then also succeed in setting the price in such a way that there is a demand for exactly the number of pieces of cake that are on the platter, and all the bread is also eaten, we have achieved a great deal. None of the cake is wasted, since it has been completely eaten up, and only those who had the highest valuation for the cake received a piece. Precisely such a solution to the scarcity problem is achieved in markets, and it is certainly not the worst solution. To be more exact, one can think of no better solution. The scarce resources are completely distributed to those who gain the most benefit from them. That is why economists have such a particular liking for markets. They are wonderful instruments for easing scarcity problems. Our very simple example allows us to clarify some important fundamentals of economic theory. First, economists assume that only individuals themselves can know what is most useful to them and what is not. Therefore, the decision as to whether an individual does or doesn't get a piece of cake is made by that individual. No one else is entitled to make a statement about what utility someone derives from eating a piece of cake. This holds in general. The utility someone experiences is just as much a deeply subjective matter as is life satisfaction. Every individual can judge for himself how satisfied he is, what generates utility, and what feelings he has. Therefore, it is inappropriate for the state, a central planning body, or any other authority to stipulate what is useful for people and what isn't useful.